going to show you a Washington Post headline here that highlights the worries, apparently, that some have about President Trump's control of the nuclear codes. Look at the way they write it with the fire and fury. Trump revives fears about his possession of the nuclear code. So that's back, apparently, from the campaign into the paper's present day. Alabama Republican Congressman Mo Brooks is a member of the Foreign Relations Committee, joins us now. He's also running for Senate against the Republican Luther Strange to fill the seat once held by Attorney General Jeff Sessions, in which we will certainly talk about in a moment. But, Congressman, I thought I might start with North Korea, as Rob and I were talking about that. What do you make of that the president's judgment is being brought into question again?
Well, I think, by way of background, that first everybody needs to calm down a little bit about North Korea. They may act crazy, but they're pretty smart, that leadership, as evidenced by them being in power and the way in which they act crazy in order to achieve a rational goal. We have a mutually assured destruction doctrine. It's national security doctrine that has worked well from the days of Mao Zedong in China all the way to the current date. Joseph Stalin and the Soviet Union, now Russia, and their leaders to the current date. And the premise is real simple. You don't attack us, we don't attack you. If you do attack us, we're going to send back so many nuclear bombs on your soil that all of you will be dead. That's the mutually assured destruction doctrine. Right. And the threat is so great of total destruction that nobody launches a first strike. The same doctrine, in my judgment, works with North Korea. A greater risk is not North Korea, but it's Iran, where you've got people who are driven by a religion that on occasion suggests that it's okay for them to commit national suicide if they take out Israel, the little Satan, and America, the great Satan, in the process of committing national suicide. That's where the mutually assured destruction doctrine may not work. And to me, we should focus more of our attention on Iran than North Korea. That
was Rob's point, I think, is that it'll be the next thing up, and your point is it may be up already. But in terms of a first strike, you brought up nobody will strike first because of the fear of mutually assured destruction. What constitutes a first strike, in your view, in this case? In other words, if the North Koreans fire a missile near Guam, is that a first strike? I mean, because that'll be the decision that has to be made by the president, right?
Well, that is the decision that will have to be made by President Trump or one of his successors, depending on whether that event ever comes to fruition. But at the time the launch is made, someone will make a decision on whether it's a threat to American soil, and if it is a threat to American soil, then someone will have to make a decision whether to have a massive retaliatory strike that, quite frankly, turns North Korea into a sea of glass. Now, the North Korean leaders, they want to live. And it's that incentive to live that I would submit is a deterrent to their actually ever launching a first strike against the United States of America. They know that they have no missile defense system. They know that we can utterly destroy that nation. At the same time, though, just to be on the cautious side, we need to improve our radar systems, our number of interceptor missiles in the Guam and Japan areas, as well as in South Korea, Alaska at Fort Greely, Vandenberg Air Force Base at California, to ensure that if we misjudge the sanity of the North Korean leadership, a rogue missile or two we can still take down before it injures any Americans on American soil.
Now, this is one of many issues, of course, that has come up in your Senate race. There are others, but I do want to talk to you about that for a few minutes. It's an important race for this seat that was held by the Attorney General. Now, President Trump, who we were just speaking about, has endorsed your opponent in the race, Luther Strange. Do you have a message for the president on that?
Yeah, I don't think that his endorsement of Luther Strange furthers the agenda of President Trump. By way of example, just yesterday, President Trump was going after Mitch McConnell for a do-nothing Senate. If that's the case, why do you endorse a person who's going to continue what the Senate has been doing and, in fact, is opposite the president on the 60% rule in the Senate that empowers Chuck Schumer and the Democrats to block every single conservative bill, every single Republican bill, every single President Donald Trump bill that we want to implement and push through the United States Senate.
So you want him to reconsider that
endorsement? It's paradoxical.
Have you spoken to anybody close to the president about that?
It's pretty much like this. If the president truly wants to drain the swamp, well, then don't go around endorsing the swamp's candidate. But ultimately, it's the president's decision, and personally, I believe that he's gotten bad advice from whoever is giving him advice on what is going on in the state of Alabama. We've got 17 candidates at one point in time who are running for this Senate seat against the incumbent. That ought to tell you that there's something wrong with that incumbent. And maybe you ought to pause a little bit and do some research and find out what the weaknesses are. And in the Republican primary right now, that incumbent is polling in the 20 percentile range, 25, somewhere in there. Incumbents who poll that low normally don't win, and so the questions ought to be asked, well, what is it about that incumbent that is causing 75% of the Alabama voters to reject him on the first ballot?
Now, the president's been feuding with the majority leader. You mentioned Mitch McConnell, and they've been going back and forth. There was a tweet about it earlier today from the president after McConnell's comments earlier in the week. You talked about draining the swamp. That's been a phrase used by the Trump administration, but certainly from your wing of the Republican Party as well. Mitch McConnell is a part of that swamp. Is that your point?
Oh, no question. Mitch McConnell may be the king of the swamp, but when you get to who and what the swamp is, it consists of the K Street lobbyists and the special interest groups that behind the scenes fill the coffers of candidates up with piles of money in hopes that those candidates and office holders in turn will not do what's in America's best interest, but will do what is in the interest of those special interests. And they love Luther Strange, these swamp critters, because he's a decades-long Washington, D.C. lobbyist himself. That's what he was before he became Attorney General. So you can understand why Mitch McConnell wants to get behind a fellow swamp critter who can raise all this money, regardless of the fact that it means that we don't get health care through the Senate, we don't do the things we need to do for deficit and debt in the Senate, we have no tax reform in the Senate, we have a 60% rule that's going to kill the entire legislative agenda of the President of the United States, still an operational tool or rule in the United States Senate that Chuck Schumer and the Democrats use to kill us. And so I agree with President Trump when he says we've got to have majority rule in the United States Senate, get rid of the 60% rule so that majority, and we have 52, that's the majority, so that we can then pass the legislation that is necessary to reverse the damage that has been done by our predecessors from the socialist wing of the political spectrum of the United States.
We'll follow this race. Congressman Brooks, thank you for coming on with us. We appreciate it.